You're a Christian.
You say that. I haven't claimed that.
Oh, what is this? Is this Christians versus atheists?
Don't be a smartass.
Either you're a Christian or you're not. Which one is it?
You're really quite something, you are.
Aren't I? But you're really quite nothing. Right? You're not a Christian.
Okay, I'm done with him.
Wow, what a great way to open up this video. My name is Ryan and I am a Bible nerd. I really want to start adding more of this type of content to my channel. I love watching these videos and have a lot of thoughts about them. So I thought, well, I'm just going to get better at answering these questions and have this be part of the channel. So I really enjoyed this video with Jordan Peterson on Jubilee on a show or a series called Surrounded, where they have somebody in the middle and a bunch of people surrounded that come up and ask these questions or have claims that they try to kind of debate one-on-one during a certain period of time. And then they can get voted off and then they switch the person that can ask the questions. Great series. Many people have watched it, had a lot of different people kind of in the center there that are surrounded by a different viewpoint. I really enjoy the show. I think it's just great to see how these people interact. And I'm a huge fan of Jordan Peterson. But right off the bat here, we have kind of a juicy moment during this debate, if you will, or during the show that all of us are kind of thinking about when it comes to Jordan Peterson. Like, he seems to be right on the edge of saying that he is a Christian. But for me, I actually really appreciate that he has not come out and said that he's Christian yet for two reasons. One, it's still a personal thing. I think he says, I haven't publicly said that, and I think it's really important that there's still certain things that need to be private. There's still certain things that can be part of his personal life, especially when you have somebody that is so scrutinized, so watched, so many followers, so many haters. I think there is a moment in time that makes sense to do that. And right now where he's at, I think is beautiful that he's working through these, being this deep thinker and being kind of a theist before jumping to the full thing of being a Christian. Because I think once you have that label, then it becomes, okay, what's denomination? And then maybe it alienates certain people that won't sit down with him, or it'll miss out on the opportunity to be able to get in videos like this. And I think there's a part of his influence that's really important where he's at to be not labeled necessarily as a full-blown Christian. And it really does come down to the point that once you become Christian, okay, now which denomination, which ones do you stand on? And then you almost start kind of these conversations within that realm where right now he can cast such a bigger net. He can have such bigger conversations until he's actually labeled as Christian. Now, he may be personally, and that's great. There's some things that still need to be private, and maybe he will get there, and I think he probably will. And that's why it's such a hot button question, why this guy interacts with it. Now, I think it's sad to see that he missed an opportunity to speak with Jordan, and it ended up being this contentious thing. Because I think when you're in a debate and both people get angry, you both lose. And so I don't think that's what this whole thing is about. Jordan handles it great and just said, okay, done with this guy. He's playing games. He's doing these types of things for clicks or for whatever else, whatever motivation it might be. Kind of that gotcha. I'm the one that got Jordan Peterson. And it's not about winning, I think, with Jordan as much. I think it's about being able to articulate a certain viewpoint and have other people also with intelligence try to have counter arguments. You'll see that in this debate where he's actually appreciative of the people that are going at it, not trying to win the argument, but trying to articulate their arguments. And I think that's what makes it so refreshing to see a Jordan Peterson on the stage pushing back on some of this stuff. They can hold his own, but also can just say, okay, we're just playing games here. Let's get into the conversation. So I want to break this into a couple videos. This is a little bit longer. First time I've broken into kind of this review video type content on my channel, but I hope to do a lot more because I watch a ton of this stuff and I've always got thoughts, and this just gives me a chance to try to articulate my thoughts as well. So we're going to go through the first person that interacts with Jordan here on the video, and then we'll do the other ones a little bit later. But I appreciate you watching. Please like, subscribe, comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this video and my thoughts on it and see where this goes. So let's continue with the video.
Hello there. I'm Dr. Jordan Peterson. I'm a clinical psychologist, a professor emeritus at the University of Toronto, an author, a podcaster, public speaker, and today I'm surrounded by 25 atheists. My first claim: atheists reject God, but they don't understand what they're rejecting.
It's always kind of a funny way they do the video. I mean, if you watch it at all, you kind of know that they just have that little countdown, and then whoever makes it to the chair first gets to win the opportunity to talk about the claim and all that kind of stuff. I always thought it's just a fun way to do it. It's just kind of part of the show. It's just kind of how they do it.
Good afternoon, Dr. Peterson.
How are you doing?
So this claim here that atheists don't know what they're rejecting. My background is in studying to become a traditional Catholic priest, daily mass, daily rosary, going on long retreats, deep into the magisterium and biblical hermeneutics. Like, I was thoroughly in it. And it seems like I do know what I'm missing. Is there something that I missed over years of study, both this issue formally and living out religion so deeply?
Well, you obviously feel that you missed something when you were practicing for the priesthood. Your aim was off then. So
And
there's
so-
always the possibility that it's still off now.
What was off about my aim in the first place?
I don't know. That might take a long time to figure out. But
Then it seems kind of like this no true Scotsman type of fallacy in which you're the arbiter of people's aims and how they understand those aims to be. How is it that you can claim that people don't know something that you know about their life despite not having met them?
well, it's obviously a generic claim, just like the atheists claim that there's no God is a generic claim. In your
I do like that answer because I think this guy really personalizes this answer and say, okay, in my case, I don't fall into this box. And I think that it's a general claim that's okay, most atheists do. But I think Jordan even lays out the groundwork that even this guy probably got to the point where he was turned off by religion for whatever reason, whether it was hurt or hate or something turned him off from it. And then all of a sudden now he just dismisses anything that has religion even close to it. And I think that's what you see with atheistic people is, oh, it's a myth, it's supernatural, it's sky daddy. I hear that all the time. And so they don't dig any deeper with it. And I think we see that on the religious side as well. People have this mild, wide talking points, but they're not very deep. And I think that that's what Jordan Peterson is trying to get, that if you get deep enough, you don't realize what you're rejecting as an atheist because you won't allow yourself to get that deep. Because it'll get to the point where you're like, well, I just reject it because it says religion, and that's it. I don't have to go any deeper. It's religious. I'm done. I don't have to worry about it. That means that I have to believe in sky daddy and myths and supernatural things. And I think that what he's getting to is there's a hierarchy of a foundation or the top thing. So you have the toppest top or the foundation. That's what we think God is when everything is boiled down to that thing. That's when we start hitting what God is. And then his character, his development, all that kind of stuff is stuff that we can add with words and hermeneutics and all this other stuff to try to figure out what that even means. But I think that's what that Jordan Peterson's saying with this claim is they don't get deep enough to even hit God. They always stop before they get there. And that's what they start to reject is up here somewhere or in the middle somewhere of my analogy. I mean, obviously it's a top or a bottom, but it's that the highest possible thing, the most foundational possible thing is where you start getting into what is God. So let's see how the continued answer here is.
case, it would have to be specified more, and I'm not claiming to understand what was going on in your mind, but my experience with atheists is twofold. Is that they have a very reductive notion of what constitutes God, let's say in the Judeo-Christian tradition.
Agreed.
And they've often been hurt by someone who was religious or by the religious enterprise.
And I would say that's true on both spectrums in a sense, that the Christian, the average Christian goer isn't going to go very deep on what they think in most cases. They're not full theologians. That's what you'll even say, well, I'm not a theologian. And that's almost like, okay, well, I'm just agnostic. I'm not a full-blown atheist. I haven't thought about it hard enough to go that as far as calling myself an atheist. But I like how he says here that a lot of times what you see, even in the case of this guy, is there's some sort of event that happened, some sort of hurt or pain or something that was tied into that religious experience that now makes them drift away from their religious beginnings. We see kids that start out really strong. They get away from kind of that nurturing thing because they don't have to think very deep in that little bubble. They go to college, they go to school, they leave that kind of that nurturing environment, and their faith isn't very deep. It's very wide, but it doesn't get very deep. So all of a sudden it starts getting cracks in their armor. And they end up being atheist or agnostic or whatever kind of spectrum there is until maybe they get later in life, get a little bit more mature, and certain things start to happen where they end up maybe hopefully back into their belief systems. But I love how Frank Turek talks about the idea that when somebody plays Mozart wrong, we don't blame Mozart. We blame the person playing the piano or whatever it might be, the musical instrument. And I think that happens a lot with Christianity, unfortunately, is people play Christianity wrong and we blame Christ or blame Christianity, where we don't actually blame kind of what happened. And so I think that's what I think he labels that beautifully right there, is that idea that they don't get deep enough because they just hit a certain point and can't go any further, or they've hurt by the experience to where they won't dig any further either. Well, there looks like a slight pause between when it starts and stop. I'm using a system called StreamYard. I'm still learning how cameras and lighting and all this stuff works as part of my show. So let's see if this continues to go. Oh, that was an interesting place to pause it there as well.
absorbed perhaps
There it
by
goes.
God himself, so to speak, and that's left
Yeah.
them with
I'm
an
still doing
animus.
this.
But I think that you have a reductive view of what atheism is. You've defined religion so broadly to include any sort of having aim in life, any sort of cultural archetypes, or having a metaphorical substrate. And atheism to you is a very specific type of like three people in the world that are these Raskolnikov type of, they want to get away with a perfect murder. It seems like you have the reductive view of what an atheist is.
That has got to be the first time Jordan Peterson has ever been called redactive, or reductive. Sorry, reductive. Reductive is basically taking something that's very, very complicated and trying to oversimplify it as kind of the reverse. And I would say maybe he does that in some degree. I mean, we all kind of do, but I would think it's the other way around with Jordan Peterson more than anybody I've ever watched, that takes something very relatively on the simple and digs in really deep and just digs further, really tries to unpack things more than anybody I've ever really listened to and watched in this age. A lot of writers I've seen do that kind of thing, but watch Jordan kind of actually in real time wrestle with some of that stuff, especially when you watch like the gospel series he did or Exodus with that round table. Man, it's got to be the first time he's ever been called that. So I thought that was a pretty interesting comment. Oh, don't freeze on me. I don't know how to make that go any
Well,
faster.
let's
Oh,
start
sorry.
with your claim. How do you define the God that you're rejecting? Like, what is God to you? You studied in the church, you found that unsatisfactory. How would you characterize what you rejected?
I think the average Christian believer, when they say that they're Christian and they believe, they mean some sort of God that is all powerful, all perfect, is somehow involved in the matters of this world, and that we look to them through wisdom and with the Logos incarnate in Christ. And it also seems like you don't believe in religion in the way that the average Christian says that they believe in religion. And there are as many gods out there as there are believers, because everybody has mutually exclusive and different views of what God is. So it seems
Well,
like
if everybody had mutually exclusive views of what God is, no one could speak to each other.
Great answer there, but I want to draw your attention again. So when he first starts out, hey, how do you know what I believe? I believe, I believe. Then he says, okay, what do you believe? And he says, well, I think most Christians believe this. Blah, blah, blah. Whoa! You just did the opposite of what you just brought to the conversation. You basically brought, okay, a very personalized. Okay, how do you know what I believe when I've gone through all this stuff? You have no way of knowing what I actually believe. So how can you make that claim? So then he says, okay, but what do you think God is? Oh, well, I think most Christians believe, and then goes on to his little rant. But I love how he pushes back on that and says, well, we're not all mutually exclusive. Otherwise, we wouldn't be in pairs of denominations or groups that have at least fundamental beliefs. Now, no human on the face of the earth is going to agree with every other human 100% on every single topic. That just does not exist. It never will exist. It just won't. But the reason we get into tribes and groups is there's enough commonality with what our belief systems are, the things we're willing to kind of die on that hill for, the things that we really are going to stand and say, okay, this is truth. That is where they become these tribal groups and nations and denominations, all that kind of stuff, circle around those common beliefs that are outside of themselves. That's what I don't think atheists ever really understand, is we do believe that there is a God that is outside of time, space, and matter, that is the creator of some of these fundamental things that we then circle around and try to explain within our limited earthly mindset to an infinite God. And so I think that's one of the things they can't understand, because they're rejecting it before they get that far. And I think that's what Jordan Peterson's trying to say. Now, is that every single one? No, there's got to be maybe a couple of them gone deeper. Maybe this guy has, but I think they reject it oftentimes not as deep as what Jordan Peterson's trying to explain with his claim. And I think that's where they're falling short. But I thought it was really interesting with this first interaction was kind of, okay, how do you know what I know? And then it's okay, well, what do you know? Well, most Christians believe this. It's like, well, you kind of reversed how you're coming at this, because the question gets posed to him instead of the other way around.
The mere fact of communication presumes a commonality of assumption and definition. And it's certainly not the case that I regard any archetypal manifestation whatsoever as equally religious. So that's not a real claim. Let me give you an example. For example, there's a sub-narrative in the story of Moses where Moses is rewarded with a glimpse of God. Okay, and that's one of the ways that God is characterized in the Old Testament stories.
Yes.
Now, Moses is a faithful.
I like what he gets into. He starts to try to categorize what Christians start to believe, but it's amazing how quickly it gets refuted. And that's why I think Jordan's case is perfect here. They won't even let him get to this part because they find something above that or kind of higher than that foundation or below that highest level. They get stuck on here before they even allow it to go any higher. And that's what we see right here. Watch how this unfolds.
Servant of God and a good man. At least that's the case within the confines of the story.
One possible
It's
interpretation.
the case within the confines of the story.
See right there, he's not even letting it get to explain kind of, okay, here's one of the definitions of God that Christians believe, because we can allow these, okay, yes, Moses is portrayed as a good character. Now, perfect? No. Flawed? Absolutely. They all are. That's what makes it such a beautiful story and so human, is that everybody kind of falls short of that glory of Jesus or the glory of this infinite holy being. But God still uses those people, and there still is kind of good and bad, rivals and heroes. There's, a recent movie came out and kind of said, well, there isn't good and bad guys. There's bad guys and worse guys. Same kind of thing. There's still kind of this hierarchy of what is a good guy and what is a bad guy. And Moses is obviously portrayed, and traditionally and culture and other writings, all this stuff portrayed Moses as a good guy, as a servant of God, used in his flaw status. And the atheist stops before it even gets there. Well, that could just be your interpretation of Moses. Sure. I mean, yes, there's still some interpretive work there, but it's obvious. If you can't even get past that, then we can't even get to the God you're rejecting, which is the claim that Jordan Peterson is making. Obviously, Moses is portrayed as a good guy in the story. And watch how this continues to unfold. I think this is pretty fascinating. Oh, there's that little pause. I don't know how to fix that pause. Well, so I
Obviously.
oh, there we go.
But
Well,
there's
not
a-
obviously.
there's
When we look at the Bible can't precisely say anything because there are so many different exegetical and hermeneutic views of this particular book, and that everybody has everybody has disagreed historically on. And it seems like even the most benign detail about a
No, that's not true. There's places, names, months, mountains. There's certain things that are definitely, that's where that event took place. Now, the interpretation of what that means for us as readers and believers, that's okay, sure. There's going to be hermeneutics, there's going to be interpretation, there's going to be, okay, this and that kind of stuff. But to dismiss the entire Bible as some sort of unknowable hermeneutic idea that you don't know what the Bible's even trying to say, that's clearly wrong. There's so many single times where it's even a hindsight document. It's like, well, what they did was bad because it turned into this, so that must have been bad, and that's why God didn't like it, didn't bless that thing, curse that thing, was obviously outside of the ought to and ought not do, and God was upset at the way that turned out because certain things happened. That's the great argument in the book of Job. It's like, okay, well, you must have done something wrong because look at all the bad things that happened to you. We do that in our society like crazy. And so, yes, there's going to be interpretation. Okay, what is in line with the will of God? And there is that struggle within the Bible. Sure, there's going to be that, and that's part of being a believer. That's part of wrestling with these things. But to say the Bible on the most benign thing is an argument every single time? Of course not. Do you think the genealogies are sitting there and say, well, he really wasn't his son? No, okay, that didn't really take place in Jerusalem. That didn't take place in the city of David or Bethlehem. No, I mean, there's absolutely, it's too big of a book to say that all of it's up for discussion. And that's where you're going to get into these arguments here about what the word is means. I mean, you get too down in the minutia where you're never really going to advance the conversation. And that's what you're going to see these fights end up getting into because they're just so entrenched in their argument for that they can't get down far enough. And I really think that's what Jordan is trying to lay out with this claim is atheists stop. They get stuck up here before hitting the foundation, or they get stuck right before the top. I'm kind of using that analogy. The highest possible thing, the lowest possible foundation, that's where we get to God. And he won't let it get there because as soon as he makes a claim that the Bible has some sort of claim it's making, then it's, oh, well, you can't know that. You can't know it. The Bible's up to interpretation on every single thing in the Bible. No way. No way. There's still plenty of the Bible that we can know when, where, if. Now, obviously there's imagery. Obviously there's songs and poetry, but there's history in there too. There's absolute history in there. There's places that we found. There's events that happen. There's battles and wars and stuff that have happened. There's history in the book. There is a Solomon's temple that was built. I mean, are you going to sit there and say, oh, hey, they say they built a temple in Jerusalem. Well, that's up to interpretation. Of course not. Of course not. There's going to still be certain things that aren't on that spectrum. And there's going to be things way past that spectrum on the other end. But to dismiss the entire thing, that none of it can be knowable in the factual sense like that is just wrong. And it's going to pause on me again.
book this big, and it seems like you can only say that the Bible says something if you first presuppose that it's univocal.
No.
So your claim essentially is that Moses in the Old Testament plays the role of a villain or is irrelevant?
Great
Because
question.
the alternative claim
I'm
is
saying that we
he's
can't
good.
know because we
that's-
can't talk to
We
those.
can't know. Why can't we know? We can know based on other people's comments, yes, their review, their opinion. We can know on tradition. We can know on just reading the story and say, obviously, God chose him. He did certain things. He was honorable. There's so many things about it that we can say. That now, is he perfect? The best guy? The goodest guy? No, of course not. There's only one person that plays that character in the Bible. But we can still say he is obviously the lesser evil of the evils that are out there. The different characters that are there. Even between him and Aaron, even the character Aaron, or the other characters that he interacts with. There's definitely a clear sign that he is the hero, like Jordan Peterson's trying to say, in the story. And I think that plays right into Jordan's claim that the atheists won't get below that because they get stuck up here somewhere. They just get stuck before they hit God because they think it's God-ish or religious-ish or, whatever. So they don't let it go any deeper than that. Say, okay. And that's, I think, that why Jordan says that they're rejecting the God they don't know, because they don't let themselves get that low to figure it out.
Authors.
If you are going to start with the presupposition that there's nothing I can say about any of these stories that you're not going to disagree with from the perspective that there are multiple...
Yeah, it'd be like saying, okay, he went to Mount Sinai. Nope, that's up to interpretation. Well, no, that's where he went. And there isn't even a reason to get stuck on that topic. That's where he went. Now, maybe there could be dispute. Okay, which mountain is that? Sure, okay. The name might have changed. The location might have changed. I mean, there's a lot of viewpoint of where the mountain is, but he obviously went to a place called Sinai. Okay. Good enough. It's like, no. He went, we got it wrong. It's translated wrong. All the other stuff they get to. Okay, but we're not going to get to God if you're going to get stuck there. And that's what he's trying to say. You're getting stuck before you even get to God. And that's what he says. Well, we can't have an argument. We can't even have a discussion about it. We're not going to get there.
Then I can't speak with you. So
And
you
we
have-
also have a short time here, so I want to get to the core of what you're arguing here, and I'd love if we could.
the
kind
core
get
of what
through
I'm
them.
arguing is that atheists reject God.
Goes right
and
back
they
to the
don't
claim.
understand what they're rejecting. So I'm trying to
Yes.
give you an example of what's being rejected and its complexity. Okay, so God rewards Moses with a glimpse of the divine. So this is a definition of the God that atheists are hypothetically rejecting.
A possible one.
I said,
See, he can't get past it. That's exactly what this claim is trying to show. He said this, okay, you're asking for a definition of God. Here is one of the possible definitions of it. Well, we can't even get there because we get stuck on the word, the possible definition of God. Okay, yes, this is one possible definition, but let me get to that definition, then we can argue, okay, why is that not a definition of God, and why are you rejecting that God? Jordan, he's just amazing. I just like Jordan Peterson so much.
Yeah.
I didn't say the. I
know.
said
That
Right.
is
He
possible,
can be
yes.
intense too.
Okay. So despite the fact that Moses is a stellar character and he's had a long and difficult life and can withstand a lot of difficulty and travail, God puts him between two cliffs. So he can just see a crack of what's in front of him. And when God walks by, he allows him to see his back. Okay, so the implication of that story is that the divine is fundamentally unknowable. It's a pinnacle experience, and that people in their finitude have to be shielded from a comprehensive vision of the basis of reality. Well, that's not the God that's defined in that manner, right? It's not a simple personification. It's not a simple old man in the sky. It's something that, in its essence, is unknowable and overwhelming.
So true. Like, again, that sky daddy idea that some just old guy with a beard is kind of where they end. But you're talking about something that is infinitely holy in the presence of something that is even a drop of unholiness would just eradicate that thing. How many times in the Bible do we see people that have the encounter with the divine and they think they're going to just be dead? They're done for. They fall on the ground, they hide, they're like, okay, because that holiness, that perfect light in something that has darkness in it would just be eradicated. And that's what makes, I think, what Jordan Peterson's trying to say here is that idea that's a little glimpse of what we could even try to comprehend as a human finite being. And that's one little description here that, again, atheists don't even let them get to that point to even try to understand something like that, because it hits some sort of stumbling block, some sort of stumbling stone before they can get to that point.
And that isn't, in my experience, the God that's defined by atheists who are attempting to undermine the story. I mean, it's the same claim, for example, that you're a finite creature and that you face something that in the final analysis is unknowable, and that you have to establish a relationship with it regardless of your inability to perceive or even withstand perceiving the whole. Okay, is there a problem with that?
I mean, the problem is that when we look at, famously, when you've been asked, do you believe in God? The question becomes, what do we mean by God? And in the Bible, it's not even clear the biblical authors know what God is, because Yahweh has historically emerged from an early storm god, a deity that doesn't exhaust the category of deity, and that has changed over the...
Really? I'm sorry, atheists, there's a couple things you got to drop. This idea that Christianity developed from other gods or other things. Is there going to be similarities? Sure, because there's stuff that we can experience, that we can see in creation, in nature, in the order of the world, that are going to have similarities in their stories. But this idea that somehow Easter and Christmas and something with some stealing of some other pagan god that was out there, it's just not the Christian belief. It just isn't. Go to the first sentence in the Bible. What does it say? In the beginning, God. Not after the gods had a battle, a war, one of them lost, and that lost carcass is the earth we're in, and we're pulled into some physical realm between a good evil or a good power and an evil power that are fighting, and we're just stuck in this cosmic battle. That is not the Jewish, Judeo-Christian idea of what God is. It just isn't. Of course, there's going to be similarities between things that people wrote, but you're going to see one book that mentions some sort of God that did something, and then suddenly there's some minute connection to what Jesus did, like being born of a virgin. I see that all the time, but there isn't stories that did. A lot of that seems to be developed afterwards anyway to tie into the Christian story, because the truth that's in the Christian story surpasses all the truth of these other gods, lowercase g gods is what we call them. But right off the bat, if you think that's what a Christian believes, that somehow we were just suckered into the God that won out the battle and won out the stories and all that kind of stuff, or are we susceptible to the God that is the true God, the God that does reflect in creation itself? That's the God that we worship. It's the one who created time, space, matter, reason, morals. All that is who we're actually, the God that we're serving. And then that God stepped into creation through Jesus. That is what makes us Christian. But this idea that there's some sort of sky god or sun god or something that Yahweh just absorbed or something like that, that's what the entire story is trying to compete against the whole time, is all these other make-believe, all these other fake human-made gods to try to explain wind and solar and stars and all that kind of stuff. That's what they were trying to explain, not realizing it's a step further back than that. Even when Paul's interacting with the Romans, there's a great passage that talks about, okay, you've got all these gods all over the place, but you got one up there that doesn't have a name, that you just want to make sure, okay, if we missed one, we got at least kind of a catch-all God that's sitting there. And that's when he makes a beautiful argument, says, that's the God we believe in, the one that's behind all this other stuff. There's just gods of stone and wood. And that's the God that we're serving, the one that predates all that stuff. In the beginning, God. That's who we're talking about. Oh, man. Pause.
The Old Testament, does God have physicality? Does God not have physicality? It seems like, yes, if you define a religion to mean anybody that has an aim, anybody that looks at the unknown, anybody who wants to go from chaos to order is inherently religious, then yes. But also in the same way, I could define atheist as somebody who doesn't dogmatically believe in a religion, or somebody who doesn't regularly attend religious services or belong to a denomination.
Again, foundation, step above. Denomination, all that kind of stuff is a step above. Theism is down here. Christianity is that step kind of above. That's where I think he's trying to make in this claim, is atheists don't go down to the foundation or go up to the highest ideal. They stop somewhere before that. He even just said that's not the foundation of the beginning things that we believe in. Pause for dramatic effect.
Help, especially the audience, kind of like boil this down. There was a lot of words there. That the central claim is that we exist somewhere between the finite and the infinite.
Central claim.
A central claim is that we exist somewhere between the finite and the infinite.
No,
Is that-
I said that we were finite and we had to establish a relationship with the infinite.
Yeah, then in that case, then we're all religious, but then I can do the same thing and define one particular element of atheism. It seems like we both have a reductive view of what the other side looks like, to the point where a conversation seems incoherent, and not just incoherent, but not in the way that the average Christian understands Christianity to be.
Do you have a
Okay, let's
problem with
pause there. Sorry.
Well, that's the first part there. I think that was the first interaction. I hope you enjoyed this video. I love your comments on it, your thoughts on it as well. I'm new at kind of doing this, so I'm still just kind of learning how to put the video together, how to edit it. So this is just kind of a new space I'm trying to get into, but I just really like this video and wanted to have some thoughts on it. So stay tuned for part 2. I'm going to post a couple more videos. There's a couple other segments in this that I really liked. So I hope you join me again and continue, maybe like the channel, subscribe, all that fun stuff, trying to do all kinds of different fun content on the channel. So again, I appreciate your time. Love to have your comments on it. Like, subscribe, and we'll see you on the next video.